Hi guys, and welcome once again to Curated Logic, where we try and up your brain game. Today we are going to be doing the next installment in our How to Win an Escape Room series, focusing on puzzles that have letter or word solutions. So if you've done the other two videos already and you're ready to give this one a go, let's get our alphabet on. The first type of puzzle most people think about when they're thinking about letters and words in an escape room is a code puzzle. The most famous of which is Morse code. With these type of puzzles, you will never need to know the code outside the room. So you won't need to have memorized Morse code or anything like that. You will typically find a legend somewhere in the room showing you what each symbol represents. Sometimes it will be pretty obvious that certain symbols are meant to represent letters. For instance, if you get a piece of paper with a whole lot of different symbols, but certain symbols are repeated, as with Morse code, the dots and dashes are always repeated in different ways for the certain letters. But sometimes you might not exactly recognize what you're looking at is letters or are representing letters, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is by finding a legend that explains what it is you are looking at. But either way, they are both pretty easy to work out once you know what you're looking at and have the legend to accompany it. The next most popular way of playing with letters in an escape room are ciphers. So technically, cipher is a type of code, and for most people codes are ciphers, but I always look at these things as two separate entities. So what I mean by cipher is not something where you have a legend explaining what images or certain pictorials mean, what letters they represent, but rather you've applied a mathematical formula on the alphabet in order to give you one letter representing a completely different letter. So, for instance, if you add 1 to each letter, an E would represent a D, an F would represent an E, and so on. This means that when you come across a string of what look like probably are meant to be words, it just ends up looking like gibberish, which can put some people off, but really, these are typically pretty easy because you will have, like you did with the codes, some sort of hint as to what you need to do to the alphabet in order to get to the right letters. I would suggest though, if you haven't done these type of ciphers before, go online, find a cipher website. There's heaps of them out there where you're able to put in some like a phrase and it will come out with what the cipher is depending on what it is you're saying to do. And there's a whole heap of famous ciphers like the Caesar cipher, which is from memory just again adding a certain number on to each letter so it becomes that many letters ahead of itself in the cipher, if that made any sense. But once you get used to these type of things, the faster you become at doing them in an escape room setting, and the faster you become at recognizing what may have been done to the original letter to bring about the new ciphered letter. The next type of puzzle is generally pretty simple. You may be given in an escape room a document, like it might be a story or some information on someone you're following or something like that. Something that is quite wordy. And if you're given a document like this, sometimes you will find that certain letters within that document have been highlighted. Now, you might be thinking that highlighted words or letters, that's pretty easy to solve. And to be fair, sometimes it is. I was once in an escape room where literally they had just highlighted each letter you need and you just put them together, and it was kind of frustrating because it didn't really take much brain power. But when I say highlighting a letter or a word, I do not necessarily mean just literally highlighting it with a highlighter. There are so many different ways a word can be highlighted in a document. It could have a different font, so you might have a few letters with different fonts. You might have incorrect letters in words, so words are spelt incorrectly, so you might have a double R in a word that should only have one, or something like that. You might have letters lined up in a certain way, or letters missing. You might get a piece of paper that has holes in it that you have to line up with another piece of paper to highlight the letters that come through the holes. There's a heap of different ways you can highlight letters or words in a document. Once you get those letters or words, typically they lead you to a lock or lead you to solving another puzzle, but it is pretty easy, but it's just working out that certain letters or words are highlighted. That can be the main difficulty in solving those types of puzzles. So if you get a document, especially if you get one that is quite lengthy, typically they won't get you to read it all. They won't expect you to be reading reams and reams of paper and information. Have a look in that document to see if there's any oddities, if there's anything with letters or words that are different from the ones around it. And if you see those, hone in on those and see if combining them somehow gives you a word or maybe another clue that will help you with another puzzle. Because so often that is how those type of documents work. Continuing on with highlighting letters. There are a number of ways in which letters can be highlighted that are a little more difficult than the ways I've just explained. A couple of these ways are highlighting letters and words using numbers or symbols. Typically, these numbers or symbols will be representing the placement of the letter in a phrase or in a page. What I mean by this is if you get a number next to a sentence, that number may represent either that number letter in the sentence or that number word in the sentence. And this works too if you get that number but represented as symbol. So if you get 3 stars next to a sentence, it may mean that's the third letter in the sentence or the third word in the sentence. This may seem really simple, but if you come across this and you haven't come across it before, it, from my experience, can take quite a bit of time to figure out what is actually trying to be told to you. This is also because typically it's not just going to give you one number, it's going to give you a few. And so you're trying to think, oh, well, maybe it means the 4th letter, then the 8th letter, then the 9th letter, or whatever. But it could also mean certain pages, or like the 4th word and the 3rd letter in that word, or the 4th page and the 3rd word in the 2nd line of the 1st letter of that. Like, so many different little combinations that sometimes it can be a bit difficult to figure out. A lot of escape rooms will kind of try to prod you in the right direction by suggesting that you're looking for a page number or a word number, but then there are quite a few that are more difficult that just won't, and they will leave it up to you to figure out. So now that you know this is something that happens in escape rooms, you probably won't need any help in solving it, will you? Another really typical way of hiding letters is through artwork. So there are 2 main ways that artwork will represent letters in an escape room. The first is simply the letters are actually in the artwork, but hidden in an artistic way through imagery that it's really kind of hard to figure out that that tree with the branch going a certain way is an R, or a TP is an A, or something like that. They can be quite difficult to figure out sometimes, so don't take it for granted that as soon as you see something you will be able to recognize letters, because even though there are easy ones, there are hard ones. The second way they'll do it is by giving you a legend that has certain symbols representing certain letters. And so you've got an artwork and you have to find those symbols in that artwork to work out what letters are actually in that artwork that spell a sentence or spell a word or something like that. Again, This might sound really simple, but typically they will try and hide these images in ways that make it more difficult for you. So it might be like half an image, if that makes any sense, half of what you would expect the image to be, and that half is hard to discern exactly what it is you are looking for. This next type of puzzle can be used in a number of different ways, but I focused on letters for it because, again, I've come across escape rooms that have used it mostly with letters. And that type of puzzle is a perspective puzzle. So what a perspective puzzle is something that when you typically look at it face on, or look at it just how you would generally look at it, it looks like nothing, or it looks like maybe a piece of artwork or just an ordinary object. But when you look at it from above or below or to the side or something like that, the whole thing changes and letters start to appear. The typical two ways this will be done, like I said, is one through a piece of art on the wall. These can be hard to recognize sometimes, but if you see a lot of like straight lines or dots that seem to be highlighting parts of the artwork, have a look from different angles because it might bring out letters that you weren't expecting. The other thing, which is much harder to discern, but again, you're probably given clues to kind of point you in the right direction, are objects. You can get objects that look almost like they're inconsequential, like they have nothing to provide. But when you put two together, or again, you just raise it up and look at it from a different angle, or look at it from the top, or look at it from the bottom or something, you start to see actual letters made by the corners and the different perspectives of the object. So have a look at everything, but also have a look at everything from every angle you can if what it's needed for isn't immediately understood. Okay, so another couple of ways that escape rooms will try to obscure words or letters is through having words written upside down or using fancy, intricate fonts. These both are things that can be pretty easily recognized, but there are ways to make it more difficult. First, you could just have a word in a fancy font upside down. That can sometimes make it a little more difficult. But there is one way that is actually really hard for most people who have never come across them, and that is called an ambigram. So an ambigram is a word that, when it's written upside down or it's written back to front, either forms the same word or a completely different but completely valid new word. When all of this is combined with a fancy font, it can be really confusing because you can get certain fonts and write words in certain ways that if you flip them upside down, they form a completely new word. So you might get a fancy font in a frame and you see a word and it makes complete sense. You can read the word and you try to use that word to solve certain puzzles. And it doesn't work. But you think, okay, well, it's going to work eventually. But maybe it's not. Because maybe what you actually need to do is flip that frame upside down so you can see a completely different word. The genius with this type of puzzle is that people just think that there's nothing amiss about what they're looking at. They recognize a word, so it feels complete. It feels like that is the complete clue that you need to use later on. So my suggestion is, if you ever see fancy fonts, especially if it's like in a frame and words are separate, flip them upside down. See if you can read a different word with that upside down, because quite often that is exactly what you'll be able to do. One of my favorite letter puzzles, purely because it's close to my heart, because it was actually in an escape room I used to work at, is a Scytale. So a Scytale, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, apologies if I'm not, but a Scytale is an ancient device that was used to code messages between, I think, in wartime, I think. And this device is basically a cylinder. It can have a number of sides, or it can just be round, but you have this cylinder with typically a little hook up the top or something to hold a piece of leather or string or something that has letters written on it, and you wind the leather or the string or the piece of fabric around the Scytale, starting from that hook, and reading down, you will find that that piece of fabric now forms certain words, or maybe just one word that is for a lock somewhere. It is a really nice puzzle to have in an escape room, because if you recognize it, you'll know what to do, but it's one that, even though people don't recognize it, they often will eventually figure out what to do, and it's a satisfying one because it makes sense. It's so, almost feels rudimentary, but still can be difficult to figure out, and that is really satisfying. So if you see like a cylinder or a piece of wood, and you have a long strap that has letters on it, typically that's exactly what you're going to have to do with it in order to get another clue or the answer to a combination. Okay, so like with the numbers video, I'm going to end on a famous puzzle. One of the most famous word puzzles you can come across is a logic puzzle. So what a logic puzzle is basically you're given a finite amount of clues about certain people or places, and you have to then work out which unique attributes are associated with which particular person or place. So for instance, in a really small example, say there are two types of shirts, black shirts and yellow shirts. They're the only ones that exist. And you get a clue that says, Albert doesn't wear black shirts. Obviously, Albert wears yellow shirts. And then you might get a clue that says, no, only one person wears yellow shirts. Therefore, everyone else you've got, which is maybe just one other person, wears black shirts. And there you have it. You've solved that little tiny logic puzzle. But of course, when it comes to 5 or more people with 5 or more different attributes, that like maybe what drink they drink, where they live, or what they smoke, I'm getting these basically from an Albert Einstein puzzle, but it does become a lot more difficult and a lot more confusing. So like with Sudoku that I explained in the numbers video, the real tip that I would give you is give these a go online. Have a look at them. Just look up logic puzzles online. You'll usually get a grid that has each of the different attributes that you have to line up and put X's in the boxes and yada yada. But have a go. There's no way you're really going to become much better at them without just practice. You don't really come across these a hell of a lot in escape rooms, but I've come across them enough times to want to have become better at them. So that is why I am including them here. Okay, so that's it for this video. If you haven't watched the first 2 videos I made on how to beat an escape room, feel free to go back and have a look at those. And hopefully you'll be able to actually get to an escape room sometime soon, wherever you are in the world. I think it's going to be a little more time before I'm able to get out and do one. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Well, I said I would be back in a couple of weeks a few weeks ago, and it's taken me a little longer because I've been busy, but I'll hopefully be back in a couple of weeks with another video, the final video in this series, focusing on physical elements of escape rooms. If you want to continue upping your brain game, follow us on any of our socials, which are all listed below, or you can support us on Patreon, which is also listed below. I hope wherever you are in the world, you are really well and you are keeping safe. Until next time, keep upping your brain game and have fun. See ya.